Okay. Hello to everyone. Good morning, good evening, good night to sing good early morning, maybe I need to say. My name is A-SANTAMARÍA. Welcome I think the best way to receive spring is by celebrating Anne Alvarez' outstanding trajectory, surrounded by friends and colleagues. And we have, as you read, a unique program for today. We are going to warm up with a brief video that I thank Howard Levine for his voice. He recorded a brief video, and after that, our beloved Joshua Durban Shuki is gonna open the program. Okay, so give me a minute.
How do we talk about feelings to children who are cut off from feelings? How do we raise hope and a sense of safety in despairing and terrified children without offering false hope? How do we reach the seemingly unreachable child and interest them in emotional relationships when they seem hardened and turned away from objects and emotional contact? Our beloved Anne Alvarez has played an extraordinary role in helping us find the possible answers to these questions and helping these children to come alive and engage, many for the first time, with the objects around them. Nothing describes Anne better than the title of her books, Live Company, The Thinking Heart. The first shows her vital and wise way of being. The second reflects her brilliant, original way of communicating at 3 different levels of analytic work with severely disturbed and damaged children. As a consultant and adolescent psychotherapist, she is currently a visiting teacher and lecturer for the Tavistock Clinic and a lecturer in the San Francisco Psychoanalytic Society Child Analysis Program. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. And now it's, here you are. Shuki.
Yes, thank you, Honey, for organizing this very special event and for this very beautiful video that we just watched. I was afraid to be overcome by emotions, actually, so I prepared something in writing, if it's okay. So I'll just read it. I'll just read it. Just bear with me a moment. Okay. Dear Anne, there is a particular kind of encounter in psychoanalysis, one that Anne herself has written about with such precision and such love, where something dormant is called into life, where the deadened becomes animated, where the frozen begins to thaw, where what had retreated into silence begins hesitantly to reach back towards the world. I've spent the better part of my professional life trying to understand and facilitate that moment, to trust it clinically, and to find language for it. And the reason I have been able to do any of that at all is, in no small part, because of Anne Alvarez. So today, on the happy occasion of your birthday, Anne, I want to offer something that feels entirely inadequate to the task and yet feels absolutely necessary: gratitude, deep, unambiguous, professionally constitutive, and personally felt gratitude. I first encountered Anne's thinking through Life Company, that extraordinary book, which when I read it in the years when my thinking was still being formed, it felt less like reading a clinical text and more like something that switched on a light in a dark room I'd been sitting in for some time. The central argument that certain profoundly disturbed children do not need interpretation so much as they need the therapist's alive, vitalizing presence was, in the truest sense of the word, a reclamation and a revelation. A reclamation of the patient, yes, but also, I would say, a reclamation of the therapist. Permission to be present, permission to reach. Anne taught us, and I mean this not in the abstract, but in the deeply operational clinical sense, that the level at which we intervene is not merely a technical question, but a profoundly ethical one. That to interpret symbolically to a child who cannot yet metabolize symbolism is not sophisticated clinical work. It is, in fact, a kind of abandonment dressed in the language of depth. At three levels of interpretation, the descriptive, the explanatory, the reclaiming one, were not just a taxonomy. They were a moral framework. They asked us, where is this patient right now, in this moment? And what does aliveness require of me right now in response? But before I speak about what this has meant for our work here at the Vista Autism Center in California, in LA, which in a way is a dream come true, not just for me, but I think also for Anne, I want to say something about the breadth of the mind behind these ideas, because Anne's theoretical contributions did not arise from a narrow clinical channel. They arose from an unusually wide canvas, and that width is, I think, one of the secrets of their enduring power. Anne is first and foremost a Kleinian analyst, and her rootedness in that tradition, with its unflinching attention to primitive anxieties, to envy and gratitude, to the depressive position as an achievement rather than as a given, has given her work its structural backbone. But she did not stay only there. She reached, and here I use that word deliberately because reaching is one of Anne's signature gestures. Clinically and intellectually, she reached outwards into developmental research, into the findings of Stern, Trevarthen, the infant observation tradition, into the empirical literature on attunement and reciprocity. She was one of the first psychoanalysts of her generation to take that research seriously, not as a threat to analytic thinking, but as a conversation partner, as a source of validation and challenge and enrichment. She reached into philosophy, into questions about the mind, about intersubjectivity, about what it means for one's consciousness to recognize another. And she reached into art. Anne is someone who looks at paintings, who listens to music, who reads poetry, not as recreation, but as a form of knowing. Her writing carries that. The prose itself has a quality that is hard to describe, but unmistakable. It thinks aesthetically. It moves between precision and metaphor with the ease of someone who regards these as two instruments in the same orchestra, rather than two competing faculties. This breadth is not eclecticism, it is integration, and it is the rarer and more difficult thing. Anyone can borrow from multiple traditions. What Anne has done is genuinely synthesize them into a coherent clinical and theoretical vision that is, in the end, entirely her own. At the Vista Autism Center, we work daily with children and adolescents across the autism spectrum, children whose relationships to aliveness itself is often the central clinical question. children who may live, as I've come to think of it, inside a kind of a sensory storm, where the world is too much and too little at the same time. Children who have retreated behind mantles, protective organizations of the self that keep the unbearable at bay, but also keep the vitalizing at bay. Children, in short, for whom the question Anne posed, what does it mean to have life company, is not an abstract philosophical question. It is the question upon which their entire developmental trajectory turns. Anne's concept of reclamation has also been central to how we think about therapeutic action at the Vista Autism Center. When we speak of primary and secondary mantling, the ways in which autistic children both protect and imprison themselves in sensory and relational withdrawal, we are, I think, elaborating a clinical territory that Anne's work illuminated first. She gave us permission to be active without being intrusive, to be effectively present without being overwhelming, to call without demanding an answer, to wait without going absent. These are exquisite clinical distinctions, and they live in our daily work. Equally central has been her engagement with mourning, with the frozen grief that so often underlies autistic presentations, the mourning for a world of contact that was never fully entered. Her insistence that we find ways to work with depressive and Oedipal phenomena in these patients has been foundational to what we now call the spontaneous mourning in autism, one of our central clinical theoretical concerns. We cannot speak about that work honestly without acknowledging how much we owe to Anne's courage in going there first. Her work on perversions and psychopathy enriches our clinical understanding and influences the analytic work done with neurotypical individuals, and not just with autistic patients. Now, I want to set the theory aside for a moment, or rather, I want to speak about the person behind the theory, because this is a birthday, and birthdays ask us to speak personally, and also because, in Anne's case, the person and the theory are not so easily separated. I've had the great privilege of knowing Anne not only through her pages, but through years of personal friendship. And I can tell you, she's exactly who her writing suggests. She would be, and also considerably more surprising. The warmth is real. Anyone who's sat with Anne at a conference, over a meal, in a corridor conversation between panels, knows that she's genuinely interested in you. Not in the polite professional way of someone fulfilling a social obligations, but in the way of someone for whom curiosity about other people is simply a basic orientation towards the world. She asks questions and means them. She listens to the answers. This is rarer than it should be, and in someone of her stature, it is rarer still. The generosity is equally real. Anne has given her thinking to colleagues with an openness that is not self-evident. She has supported work that extends her ideas, engaged seriously with challenges to her positions, and made space for clinical and theoretical voices that were still finding their way. She has been generous to me, to the Vista Autism Project, to the broader effort to think psychoanalytically about autism in ways that I will not enumerate here because it would embarrass her, but that I carry with me, and that have mattered enormously. What runs through all of this, the warmth, generosity, the humor, the theoretical breadth, is something I can only call a fundamental reach for life, and is curious in the way that children at the best are curious, without agenda, without the need for findings to confirm prior positions, without the defensive narrowing that can settle over a long career like a kind of intellectual classification. She remains genuinely open to being surprised, to discovering that something she thought she understood turns out to be more complicated or stranger or more interesting than she had thought. This is, in a clinician of her seniority and achievement, an extraordinary quality. And it is, I think, no wonder. It is the living proof of the theoretical commitments she has staked her career on. You cannot spend decades arguing for the importance of vitality and compassionate understanding without, at some level, embodying it. She also embodies something else that matters deeply to me: absolute commitment to psychoanalytic truth, and does not trim her thinking to fit fashions or institutional convenience or the comfort of her audience. She follows the clinical material where it leads, even when it leads somewhat difficult, even when it challenges received wisdom. Her willingness to say, quietly and without fuss, that some of what we have taken for granted in psychoanalytic technique may not serve the most vulnerable patients. That was not a popular position when she first took it. It required a kind of intellectual courage and integrity that is easy to admire in retrospect and was considerably less easy to exercise in the moment. Bion spoke of the importance of being without memory and desire, of pure open receptivity. I've often thought Anne's achievement goes slightly further. She has taught us to hold both memory and desire and hope and loss and theoretical precision and clinical humility all at once, without any of them cancelling the other. That integration is rare. And the work you've done, the books, the papers, the technique, the supervision, the decades of patient and rigorous and joyful attention to the most vulnerable of our patients, has shaped not just a school of thought, but a generation of clinicians who bring a fundamentally different quality of presence into the consulting rooms because of you. And I am one of them. On this birthday, I want to say simply, and with all the inadequacy that simplicity carries when the feeling beneath it is large, thank you. Thank you for aliveness, wisdom. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your generosity and your humor and your endless, wonderful curiosity. Thank you for the company. Many, many happy returns, dear Anne.
Oh, thank you so much, Shuki. This is beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. Oh, wow. We have now, I think Paul is, wait. Well, no, sorry, Paul Moore is not here yet, I think, but we're going to continue with Phyllis. Where is Phyllis? I see you.
I am here.
Here. You are Paul? Oh, yeah. Sorry. It's because it's Paul. Where are you, Paul? Can you please raise your hand so I can see you? Oh, yeah, I see you. Here you are. Here you are, Paul. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, first of all, happy birthday, Anne. You're having a great day. Okay, so I met Anne Alvarez over a cup of tea that went cold eventually. It was a play therapy conference in Dublin around 2016. I had been on a panel responding to her presentation, and I made some remarks about the possible neurological substrates of unconscious communication. The idea that what passes between therapist and patient in those wordless bodily moments might have identifiable pathways in the brain. At lunchtime, Anne came and found me, and we sat down together. And what followed was one of the most intense and enjoyable academic conversations I have ever had. We talked about neuroscience and psychoanalysis, about what the brain might tell us about the clinical phenomena she had spent decades describing, about the kind of patients who fall through the gaps of conventional thinking. We disagreed about some things and we agreed about more. And by the end of it, I felt I had found a kindred spirit, someone who shared my intellectual interests and a certain temperament. What I mean by that, what I mean by temperament is this. Anne anyone who knows Anne, has a healthy disrespect for aloof, austere dogma and an impatience with any version of psychoanalysis that mistakes detachment for neutrality. So do I. And we connected on that immediately. As you all know, there's a tradition in psychoanalytic thinking, a perfectly honorable one, that emphasizes restraint, abstinence, and the analyst as a blank screen. And for some patients, that approach works well. But Anne has spent her career working with patients for whom that posture is actively harmful, children and adults who have never been drawn into relational life in the first place. As Anne taught me, you cannot sit back and wait for someone to emerge if they had never been there to begin with. Sometimes you have to roll up your sleeves, as Anne likes to say, and get stuck in. That phrase is not one you will find in many psychoanalytic textbooks, but it captures something essential about Anne's clinical sensibility, and it is one of the reasons her work spoke to me so immediately. When I met Anne, I was working with adults on the autism spectrum and with people living with profound amnesia as a result of brain injury, and with a broader caseload that included some patients at the more extreme end of trauma and disturbance. On the surface, this looks distant from Man's world of child psychotherapy at the Tavistock, but in practice, her ideas turned out to be among the most clinically useful I've ever encountered. And so 3 concepts in particular changed how I work. The first one is reclamation. Anne describes moments in therapy when the clinician, moved by a countertransference sense of desperate urgency, actively calls the patient back from a state of near psychic death. Her example of Robbie is the one I keep returning to, a severely impaired adolescent, and the therapeutic turning point came from an urgent call. Hey, Robbie, rather than a carefully constructed interpretation. And he replied, hello there. And that moment is electrifying every time I read it. In my own work with amnesic patients, I have found analogous moments. A patient with severe amnesia cannot remember who you are from session to session, or even from minute to minute sometimes within the session. There is no narrative continuity to hold them, and yet in certain moments something reaches them. Not an interpretation, not an explanation, but a quality of emotional contact that cuts through the cognitive devastation. The first time I experienced this with a patient, I did not have a name for what I was doing. After reading Anne, I did. I was attempting reclamation. I was trying to call someone back. Another concept, the 3-level schema, Anne distinguishes between the explanatory level, the why because of classical interpretation, the descriptive level, naming the whatness of the patient's experience, and the intensified vitalizing level, awakening feeling itself. This framework gave me a way of understanding something I had been struggling with clinically. Certain patients seem unreachable by interpretation, no matter how accurate. The interpretations were not wrong, they were pitched at the wrong level. And some patients have not yet arrived at the experience that interpretation would address. You have to help them get there first. I think this is one of the most important clinical ideas in contemporary psychoanalysis. That default assumption, the default assumption in much of psychoanalytic training is that interpretation is the primary therapeutic instrument. And schema does not abandon interpretation, but it puts a question before it. Can this patient use what I'm about to say? And if they cannot yet hold 2 thoughts in mind simultaneously, if they are not yet in a state of feeling that would make an interpretation meaningful, then offering one, no matter how brilliant, is like speaking to someone who's not yet woken up. The vitalizing level is about waking them up. That reordering of priorities changed something fundamental in how I sit with patients. And the final concept I want to talk about is the idea of the undrawn child. And Anne argues that a child who has retreated from contact, implying they were once engaged, is a fundamentally different clinical proposition from a child who was never drawn in. With the first, you were making it safe enough for them to come back. And with the second, you were trying to draw them into a world they've never entered. This distinction clarified my work with adults on the spectrum in ways I had not anticipated. Many of the people I was seeing were not defended against the relationship. They had never fully arrived in it. That required a completely different clinical response, providing what had never been there, rather than uncovering what was hidden. I had trained, as most of us do, in a model that assumes the patient has an internal world full of conflict, and the therapist's job is to help them see it. Anne's work forced me to reckon with the possibility that for some patients, the internal world is not conflicted, it's empty. And the therapeutic task is not excavation, it's something closer to cultivation. After Dublin, we stayed in touch. I consulted with Anne on my neurological work with amnesic patients, and she was generous, incisive, endlessly curious. She wanted to know what the neuroscience could tell her about what she was seeing clinically. She was equally willing to push back when she thought the neuroscience was getting ahead of itself. I remember one exchange in particular. I was describing the preserved affective capacities of a profoundly amnesic patient, someone who could not remember my name, could not remember the previous session, could not form new explicit memories at all, yet whose emotional responses in the room were appropriate, shifting and clearly relational. I was framing this in terms of subcortical affect systems, pancreas, seeking and panic grease circuits, trying to explain why psychotherapy could still work when episodic memory was destroyed. Anne listened carefully and then asked a question I've never forgotten. She asked, "But what does it feel like to be with him?" That question pulled me back from the theoretical to the clinical in a single instant. She was not dismissing the neuroscience. She was reminding me that the neuroscience means nothing if you lose the patient in it. The feeling of being with someone is the data. The brain scans, the lesion maps, the circuit diagrams, these are one way of thinking about what is happening. The other way is to pay attention to what is actually in the room. Anne has always held both, and she has helped me hold both too. That kind of exchange where both disciplines take the other seriously without deferring to it is what neuropsychoanalysis is supposed to be about. And Anne practiced it before I think even the word existed. So Anne is funny. I want to say that plainly because I think her character and her ideas are inseparable, as has been mentioned earlier. She has a warmth and a directness and a mischievous quality, it has to be said, that makes her a joy to be around. No pomposity, no hiding behind jargon. And when she talks about clinical work, you can feel the aliveness in it. You can feel that she was in the room, present, paying attention with every fiber of her being. That quality of aliveness is what she means by live company, and she embodies it. Another moment that always stays with me was the first time I consulted with Anne on a case. And at the end of presenting the case, she said to me, "Paul, you're a good therapist." And nobody had ever said that to me before, and I don't know if you remember, Anne, but I got quite emotional. So that's a huge moment for me. So what I admire most about Anne is her courage. It takes something to stand up in a psychoanalytic world that has historically prized interpretation and restraint and say, sometimes interpretation is not enough. Sometimes the patient needs you to do something. Sometimes you cannot sit by and watch a patient harm themselves. That willingness to challenge orthodoxy, always in the service of the patient, is what, to my mind, makes her work matter. Finally, Anne's great insight is that for some patients, the difficulty is deficit, not conflict. Something was never there and needs to be provided. That insight changed how I understand my patients, how I practice psychotherapy, and how I understand myself as a clinician. Before I encountered Anne's work, I think I sometimes mistook my own therapeutic instincts for departures from proper technique. And Anne gave me a framework that said that impulse to reach the patient, to call them back, to be more than a mirror, that is not a failure of analytic discipline. That is the work. And it's an honor to say these words in your live company. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you. And now, thank you so much. We have Phyllis.
I
Here you are.
first of all,
Here.
I
Okay.
just want to thank those who've already spoken because it was very beautiful and enriching just to hear what you had to say. I thought about what I would say today, and I imagined it would resonate with everyone because Anne is so herself and likely to be redundant, which I'm sure it will be. Nonetheless, I'm honored to be given the opportunity to honor you, Anne. I first met Anne many years ago when she became a regular consultant for a child analytic program in San Francisco. And she generously joined us every year, listening to cases, sharing her clinical sensitivity and her powerful capacity for observation, her depth of thinking, and courageous individualism, all delivered in her warm, engaging, idiosyncratic manner. In addition, I was privileged to present my own material, cases, child and adult, and without fail, she would speak with a voice that reflected how completely she took in just not the patient's subjectivity, but their humanity. She shed a light on the material and my experience of the patient that was always revealing. I think there are a number of qualities which have already been stated about Anne that are so rare. Others have spoken to the originality of many of her concepts, so I'll be brief. First, she so deeply and naturally relates to people and engages them. Secondly, her courage, which has already been mentioned. It must have been extraordinary to boldly disagree with many of your beloved and respected colleagues, and to insist upon the importance of what she observed clinically despite those objections, and yet to remain close to them personally and intellectually, which in my experience in the psychoanalytic world is rare. The world would be a better place if more people could do that. She always remains faithful to what she actually observes, refusing to let theory explain it away. She's willing to say, I got it wrong. Not just to see something new, but to acknowledge what hasn't worked and to let it go and change course. For me, she models the best of what it means to be a psychoanalyst, to look carefully, to be uncertain, to recognize what works and what doesn't, and to be willing to think and do something different. She has for me, and I know many people, and we've just been hearing about that, nourishes in all of us the freedom to use oneself creatively, but always with self-reflection and assessment. She is an inspiration in the deepest sense. Thank you so much, Anne, and happy birthday.
Oh,
Thank you,
thank
Phyllis.
you. Really so lovely. Now we have Paul Bell. Where are you, Paul?
Hi there.
Oh, yes, see you.
You can find me?
Yes, here you are.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for inviting me, and hi, Anne. It's nice to see you. The reflections that I have, I guess, are more kind of personal than theoretical for Anne. I wanted to share a couple of anecdotes with everyone here about my experience of working with Anne over the years. I've seen that there's a couple of members from my practice that I run up in Scotland here who are also supervised by Anne. So I think in many ways, Anne, you're kind of the patron saint of the anchor practice up in Scotland, and I hope your thinking is being kind of disseminated widely up here. The the first story I wanted to tell was really about how I kind of came into contact with Anne's work. So my first job in child psychotherapy was as a kind of support worker in a pupil referral unit, which was a school, but in name only. It was more of a prison. It was where young people were sent when they couldn't manage a normal school, when their behavior was too dysregulated, when they provided mystifying behaviors to the people around them. Unfortunately, I was supervised by a child psychotherapist at the time, and I kind of brought some of the material to him. And he said to me, look, Paul, if you want to understand what's going on in the minds of these very, very disturbed young people, you need to read this book. And this book is Live Company. It's by Alvarez. So I bought a copy. It was kind of pre-Amazon, so I had to go to my bookshop and order one. So it took a little while to come in. At the same time as this, I was in a kind of a quandary about my career because prior to being into mental health, I was a music teacher, as a professional jazz musician, and I taught saxophone. Um, and I was on the fence as to which direction I was going to go, whether I was going to go into music or this mental health stuff. And I'd also been reading about psychoanalysis, and I felt a bit of a rush kind of reading Freud for the first time. But the more I read, it felt quite kind of stuffy and formulaic, some of it. And I wasn't convinced that this was the kind of world that I wanted to spend my life in. So there were lots of kind of competing interests and conflicting thoughts in my mind. Anyway, shortly after I ordered it, Live Company arrived and I started reading and I was immediately kind of gripped by it. But there was a particular phrase that kind of stuck out, which I'm going to read out. This is my original copy of Live Company. This is a book that I always have at least 3 copies of because I end up giving 2 or 3 to supervisees throughout the years. But this is my one with my underlinings. Anyway, this phrase that kind of stuck out for me was Anne writes in the introduction, the popular image of the zipper-mouthed, detached, and frosty analyst scientist really no longer applies. The comparison instead should perhaps be with a trained and skilled but constantly improvising musician who, like the patient, has to live and learn from felt experience and, not surprisingly, also from practice. So that description and comparison of a kind of an improvising music process with a clinical process with a young person kind of sounded a bell in me, and it felt like something that I could commit to and that I could really do. And I think as well as Anne very wisely points out, you need to practice this stuff. You can only start to improvise once you know the rules inside and out. So I think, yeah, that comes across in all of Anne's work, and I hope it's kind of come through to me as well. The other anecdote I wanted to share, I don't think I've shared this one with you, Anne, actually, is about when you first started supervising me. So Anne was my intensive case supervisor as a trainee at the Tavistock. And Anne was supervising my work with a very, very psychopathic young teenager. I'm sure you remember him, Anne. He was quite a handful at the time. Um, anyway, I'd kind of, I'd been struggling a little bit with the training. And again, I don't know if I shared this with you, Anne, but I was on the verge of leaving the training because I had some supervisors who were very orthodox, should we say. And I felt very pleased when I saw that you'd be my kind of supervisor for this case. Anyway, we began supervision. I bought kind of material to Anne. And Anne would kind of think with me and listen to the sessions. And then every so often she'd say to me something like, well, Paul, Betty Joseph always used to tell me that the way to manage this is don't return the projection too early or stay close to the affect. And I found this really helpful and interesting. But after a while, I started wondering why Anne was talking about Betty Joseph so much. And me in my kind of, I guess, kind of naivety and ignorance, I thought that Anne was boasting. I thought Anne was saying, oh, well, I was supervised by Betty Joseph, and which to anyone that knows Anne knows that that's ridiculous. And this carried on. I think Anne mentioned things that Betty Joseph had said to her over the years for a few more supervision sessions. And I think, again, I don't know, I suspected that Anne could see that I was a bit confused by this, or I didn't really know what was going on. And then, Anne, a few months into supervision, you said something to me that has stuck with me, which was, and again, I'm kind of paraphrasing here. I think you said, it takes an awful lot to acknowledge that there is something missing in you that somebody else might be able to give to you, that they might be able to provide for you. And you were talking about, I think, my relationship to the patient, but I felt you were also talking about our supervisory relationship, and that there was something that I needed to hear, and that you could provide that. And I felt that that was perhaps what Billy Joseph had provided for you as well. That was certainly the impression that I'd got. So that really kind of changed how I thought about clinical work and how I thought about supervision as well. And now in my career, I have quite a few supervisees. And when I get into tough material with them and I get a bit stuck, I'll kind of have a think and I'll say to them, well, actually, Anne Alvarez always tells me that the way to manage this is by don't return the projection too early, stay with the affect. And I can see them sort of rolling their eyes a little bit and thinking, oh God, he's talking about Anne Alvarez again, isn't he? And I hope that they will come to understand, as I have, that that's not about showing off or boasting about who your supervisor is. It's about acknowledging, I feel quite emotional, excuse me. It's about acknowledging that somebody has had a very, very profound impact on your development as a person, your skill as a clinician, and what you can then give to other people. And that, I think, is as good a definition of live company as I can come up with. So yeah, I think as people have said before, overwhelming gratitude to you, Anne, and thank you for all the years you've spent helping me with very troublesome young men usually. And happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you. And now, Galit. Here you are. Wait, Galit. Here you are. Here.
Hello. I also will read because of the emotion. I first met Anne Alvarez in 1992. At that time, I was doing my internship in clinical psychology in a kindergarten of children with autism in Tel Aviv. Together, we read Anne's first book, Live Company, that had just been published. Read the book from cover to cover, stopping, talking, discussing, arguing, asking questions, bringing examples. The encounter with the book was revolutionary for me. The humanity, the curiosity, the subtlety of observation, the constant examination of herself and of the patient, her wisdom and depth, the continuous search at every fraction of a second for understanding and clarification of herself, of her patient, and of the theoretical conceptualization. Along with the ability to say, I do not understand, I was mistaken, I misunderstood. This was very refreshing and liberating for a young psychotherapist. Thus, I was privileged to have Anne's live company from the beginning of my professional path. Over the years, I have come to appreciate this privilege more and more. Since then, I have met Anne several times at conferences and in supervisions. The personal meeting confirmed and even deepened the experience. It was an intelligent, pleasant, human, and vital encounter, one that nurtured and enriched my clinical meeting with challenging mental states and facilitated my growth as a therapist. A live company of a thinking and loving heart. And you are a true thinking and with an investigative soul. You search for explanation for the phenomena you encounter. You follow your art and your curiosity in order to understand the experience you are confronted with. You ask many questions and hold on to them long enough until you find answers. You insist on meaning and understanding, and this is how you write. Reading your writings evoke many associations. It stimulates thoughts and challenges the reader to ask questions. I will try to highlight a few points that are essential to Anne's way of thinking that fundamentally contribute, in my mind, to understanding and working with complex mental states. Anne's perspective is psychoanalytic and developmental. She searches for every fragment of hope, potential, and budding development with an inquisitive and creative eye. She turns over existing concepts, expand them, and deepen their significance. She is focused on the patient and on what the patient evokes in her. Anne repeatedly managed to shake off existing conversation. She observes and thinks about her experience from different angles and then provides new and original viewpoints. Anne's writing is accompanied by many clinical examples and keeps us close to the life experience in the consulting room. This does not come at the expense of theory. She searches for explanation and theoretical conceptualization for what she saw and experienced. This clinical example enlivened and clarified the theoretical material and helped the reader to continue thinking. Alvarez shared with us the development of her thinking, a way of investigating, and the changes she makes in her own work. The theoretical changes emerge from the clinic, out of the ongoing investigation of herself and of her patients, with the ability to acknowledge impasses, mistakes, and misunderstandings. Her roots are deeply planted in Kleinian thinking, in which she found a conceptual home. From this vertex, she continually examined the clinic, the theory, and herself from a double perspective of self and object simultaneously. As she writes, it's a duet, not a solo. Unexpanded psychoanalytic thinking and practice not only in regard to autism, but also in regards to complex mental states and developmental psychic deviations in general. She expands and deepens the notion of presence and absence, vitality and psychic death. She coined and conceptualized many concepts, level, connections, and regulatory processes. With Robbie, Anne encountered emptiness and nothingness, what had not yet come into being. It took her many years to conceptualize this experience. From the encounter with nothing, she found ways to meet him and to bring him back to the family of men. This experience with Robbie were seminal in her enlargement of therapeutic technique. And you gave nothingness different names, shades, and form: deficit, emptiness, void, despair, helplessness, being lost in nowhere without knowing, states in which there is no feeling, no object, no development. From this, you search for ways to allow the emergence of what had not been born yet, how to enable experience, feeling, being. You conceptualized and added tools, reclaiming the descriptive level, the temporal container, and many more. In my mind, you developed the experience of emptiness into a fundamental concept in your thinking. Being, presence, as opposite to nothingness for you, is the search for every remnant of open life. Your approach seeks the potential within the patient to identify every fragment of health and development, to reclaim it, to name it, and allow its expression and projection. To see how many things have not yet come into being and what may allow them to begin to emerge. Anne's thinking is in continuous, a developmental continuum, a continuum of presence and absence, liveliness and mental death, good and bad, and so on. Thinking in continuums makes it possible to build bridges. The idea of the continuum of levels of functioning, levels of calibration, that provide us with tools on how to understand and meet our patients. She obliges us to attend to the most microscopic of subtleties and the finest of distinction between places that may appear similar but are existentially different and require different therapeutic intervention and therapeutic attitudes. She continuously invites us to notice where we are located on the developmental continuum, to remain lively, alert human object, even when confronted with fragmented, empty states. She insists on distinguishing between states that are developmental and states that are pathological, arising from a variety of causes, whether congenital structural factors or those resulting from abuse, neglect, or trauma. These are states in which development did not occur, and therefore there is underdevelopment, as distinct from normal developmental states. She calls on us to relate to chronicity, to attend to the degree of withdrawal or lack of vitality rather than its cause. How we must work with the consequences of the deficit or disturbance, mental states that consolidate and harden into enduring character traits. She proposes ways to help patients develop psychic areas that never develop. The degree of chronicity and its severity are central factors in pathology. Anne tries to understand the mind and pathological mental states, but perhaps even more, she is preoccupied with the path that enables change and development. This begins with what Anne refers to as hearability, how she and words can be taken in and understood by the patient, and later introjected and internalized by any means. Tone, prosody, intonation, content, gaze, movement. She examined how introjection can be formed, how she can be heard in difficult, despairing, and lost mental states. This is a theory and thinking that teaches us to meet the patient where he is, and from there to begin a dialogue with him, to help him express himself and even begin to hope, to dream, to feel, to be, and sometimes draw him toward us and toward himself. It is moving and joyful to celebrate your 90th birthday with you. You continue to inspire, to think, to develop, to teach, and to investigate. I look forward eagerly to your next book.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, now we have a surprise. Thank you, really, thank you, Khalid. Let me see. Hello to everyone. Today we are honored to celebrate our beloved colleague and friend, Anne Alvarez. Anne Alvarez was born in Toronto, Canada on 1st of January 1936 to Beryl and Jack Adams. Life allowed us to meet an exceptional human being. Her mother, Beryl, was a working mom in the 1940s, a secretary as the times allowed, and a talented pianist. During the war, all the neighboring women met around to sing around Beryl's piano on the weekends, making merry afternoons. Anne's father was in the Royal Canadian Air Force, but never saw action due to a childhood accident which blinded him in one eye. Her mother's father, Georgie, lived with them while Anne was growing up, and so her grandfather was like a father figure to her during the war years. Her education and ambition was encouraged by her uncle George, who was a brilliant lawyer but became disabled by polio. She attended the University of Toronto, where she studied psychology, graduating in 1957. She spent a year at Indiana University and later was awarded a British Medical Research Council grant to travel to the UK to work on research with the distinguished psychologist Graham Folds. She arrived in London, England in 1960. In London, she met the literary critic and writer Al Alvarez. Anne and Al married in 1966. They moved into a house in Hampstead in northwest London, where they raised their two children, Luke and Kate. In 2021, after the death of Al, her husband, Anne moved to Truro, Cornwall, in southwest England to join her daughter Kate, son-in-law Danny, and her two grandchildren, Cass and Tommy. She celebrated her 19th birthday on January 1st. Anne has shown us that, as Octavio Paz wrote, Freedom does not need wings, but rather to put down roots. And that is how she has built an incredible and loving family. Professional life. In 1962, Anne began training as a child and adolescent psychotherapist at the Tavistock Center. She ran a psychoanalytic practice at home and worked at the Tavistock, where she became co-chair for the Autism Service. As we all know, Anne has made significant contributions to our understanding of autism, borderline states, and the psychoanalytic treatment of children who have experienced severe emotional deprivation or trauma. She began writing about her work with children in 1992. She has written numerous influential books and articles on child psychotherapy, including her first book, Live Company: Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy with Autistic, Borderline, Deprived, and Abused Children. Betty Joseph has been recognized by her as a great influence in her work. Anne is internationally renowned for her groundbreaking concepts. Her worldwide teaching has underlined the importance of hope, vitality, and responsiveness in therapeutic relationships. She has been a source of inspiration over the years, both for colleagues and students. A second book came out in 2012, The Thinking Heart: 3 Levels of Psychoanalytic Therapy with Disturbed Children. With unusual candor, Anne shares her thinking and wisdom and generously reminds us of the importance of considering traumatized children as flowers that have to be opened too soon. Anne is currently a consultant child and adolescent psychotherapist and a retired co-chair of the Autism Service at the Tavistock Clinic, London, and continues to consult, write, and lecture internationally. The non-profit A-SANTAMARÍA Association is deeply honored to have Anne as an honorary member. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate one so richly deserving of this tribute, a woman, a colleague, a dear friend. Through life presence and thinking heart, she has opened a path toward those children once thought beyond reach, restoring them to their rightful place within the psychoanalytic world. And for that quiet, luminous gesture, for daring to say, "Hey, light a candle," so they are no longer left in the dark, we offer our deepest gratitude. We love you, dear Anne.
Very moved. Thank you very, very much. All of you, thank you so very much. My goodness. I don't know who this woman is they're talking about, but I'm interested to hear.
Well, I send a special thanks to Kate, your daughter, and I mean, she sent me all these photos and information, and also to Evelyn Pye, Lindy, our dear Lindy, who helped me with contact with the contacts also. So this is our gift to you, and
That's so lovely.
thank you
It
all.
is a lovely surprise.
Yeah. And now we have a 10-minute recess to grab a coffee and breathe again and continue with Chiara. So I suggest you to just turn off your video and I'll see you in 10 minutes, okay?
Okay.
Okay, we're ready. Um, let's give the word to Chiara. Where are you, Chiara? I see you now. I see you. Yes.
Okay.
Here you are. Okay.
Oh, there she is.
This video and everything my colleagues have already said underscores how honored and happy and moved I am to have this opportunity to express my gratitude to Anne. Thank Hani for inviting me, to say a few words. I first heard about Anne Alvarez in the late 80s. I was quite young, and the way Francis Tasting spoke about her made a strong impression on me. Francis was deeply grateful to Anne for having introduced her to developmental psychology research, which allowed her to move more confidently beyond the idea of normal primary autism. Before meeting Anne and reading her books, I had associated her name to someone who, while strongly rooted in tradition, freely explored other fields of knowledge. I met her much later, and having had the privilege of doing supervision with her, this initial impression was fully confirmed. Much has been said about Anne's work and how it opened new ways of treating patients. Much has also been said about how she calibrates interpretation according to the patient's degree of development and internalization, patiently holding and exploring their projections within herself before interpreting. Her listening is guided by her knowledge of child development, psychoanalytic observation, countertransference, including bodily countertransference, and her capacity to change her mind. The sense of hope permeating Anne's work doesn't mean that she's unaware of the difficulty in dealing with unintegrated, unrepresented states, which she, more than others, has treated. It stems from her ability to grasp the patient's lightest sign of vitality and evolution, and from her faith in natural human development. This is why, for Anne, stepping back in certain crucial moments of spontaneous integration is just as important as reclaiming a lost patient. Her more natural and containing stance is just as important as taking an active one, a choice that is precisely calibrated to the level of emotional communication, to the patient's pace of development. The process of becoming a subject with one's own vitality and agency and identity underlines Anne's work. Through her vitalizing presence, she acts on potential, on innate expectations that have not been fulfilled, on tropism in Bion's terms, starting from the bond created by the transference. It is not just a matter of being a container available to welcome projections from those patients who are not called back from the void in the primary relationship, in Bion's words, but of attracting and condensing through one's own presence the patient's minimum vital forces so that they can find their own source of liveness. Anne has always been attentive to what changes our perspective and technique when we really try to see things through the patient's eyes. She reminds us, I quote, the grammar of rightful needs, one that allows a good object and good self to grow. The sense of how things should be, it is connected, I think, she says, to a deeper sense of order, justice, rightness, unquote. This doesn't mean magically changing reality, but acknowledging the legitimate need for a future that illusion encompasses. It means acknowledging the need to be recognized as capable, freeing themselves from crippling projections, or putting one's own fear and the bad object at a distance. Take, for example, Richard, a child to whom she noted she would have said something different had she recognized his need to be seen, quote, as capable of being, or at least of becoming, a potent reparative father, unquote. Interpreting this need as an omnipotence can harm a patient whose ego is not strong enough. In this vein, I'd like to mention the patient I treated years ago and discussed with Anne in supervision. Alex spent a lot of time lying on the floor or lining up toys, much like the sleeping dolls of the deprived and severely depressed children Anne has described. He was unable to play and wore only black. He was stuck in a depression that wasn't his own, feeling as though an invasive object had stolen all the colors from his life. One day he came in, and after barking loudly, as if he wanted to expel something, he said, "I want to do something to my box." He took a felt tip pen and started punching holes through the cupboard lid, his gestures growing stronger and stronger and increasingly precise. He looked at me with satisfaction, as if to say, "This is what I need to do, and I know I can do it here." Throwing one pen after another through the hole into the box, he said, "All my rage is in there." To me, it seems as though he had created openings that could allow new forms of communication and internalization. Anne's attention to those distinctions that inform our technique guided me here. Alex, who had never been ruthless before, was trying to experience his strength, his own male identity, which was quite different from the full self he had confused with his mother's. It wasn't a question of omnipotent destructiveness, but of daring to explore a sense of potency, in Anne's terms, for the first time. The lid was full of holes. Alex asked with conviction, "I have to be creative, don't I?" I replied, "Of course." "Do you think I'm courageous?" "Yes," I answered. Before leaving, he said, "Tell my father I've gone. I've moved on into the future." This vignette brings so much of Anne's teaching into mind. Anne has shown us how we can help our patients transform a devouring void into an emptiness that can be held, mirrored, communicated, and creatively represented. She has shown us how the most simple gestures, when mirrored, becomes creative, like Cindy's unforgettable fingerprint in the Play-Doh that Anne interprets as the child's need to leave a trace of herself behind. Anne's insightful thinking brings us to ask ourselves how we help patients free themselves from a sadistic and cruel, overpowering superego. She suggests speaking directly with this superego, which I did with Alex, giving his superego the identity of a mean teacher, whose severe criticism had paralyzed him. We gradually pushed the teacher away and then locked her up in jail. Eventually, she was forgotten and Alex's colors came back. He came in one day wearing a t-shirt that read, "From nothing to something." Focusing on the positive forces for growth and development, and opens surprising perspectives. Patients can learn by sharing joy and pleasure, not just pain, panic, and despair with us. They can learn to separate and come back together flexibly, integrating separability with togetherness. They can accept what Anne has called the language of vulnerability, if we ourselves can accept it, acknowledging our own moments of helplessness. Anne offers us images and representation that expand our capacity to think and find new ways to address patients and become audible. She becomes audible because patients can accept what they hear, because they feel addressed as a subject and they find the new object interesting. I could add much more here, but I'll stop now with gratitude for all I've learned from Anne, and especially for her teaching us to think freely, to listen with our hearts.
Thank you so much, Chiara.
Thank you, and happy birthday, Anne.
Thank you. And now we have
Thank you so much.
Kay Wong. I don't know what time is it there. Sing, here you are, I see you. But here you are.
Hi. I'm known as Kai at the Tavi Stock, and I'm based in Taiwan. It is 1 a.m. here in Taiwan, so I hope I don't switch into power saving mode too quickly when I'm talking to you. It was a great privilege to be supervised by Anne during the final year of my child and adolescent psychotherapy training at the Tavistock, and to have had the honor of continuing this supervisory relationship with her after I qualified as a child psychotherapist in 2020. And supervision and the books have inspired me immensely, especially in understanding individuals who have a diagnosis of ASD. Furthermore, and profound reflections on the therapist's stance, which include concepts like liveliness and connection, have emphasized that in certain states of mind, the patient requires the therapist to play a more active role. The concept of the undrawn child has also been a major inspiration to me. While the loss of a good object is the source of deep psychic pain, not everyone has actually experienced a good object to begin with. Similarly, from the perspective of ego development, not everyone possesses robust ego functioning. In my view, some fundamental psychoanalytic concepts have been broadened and extended by Anne's emphasis on deficits in the object and the ego. And during my years of being supervised by Anne, she frequently shares insights from workshops and she attends or new theories and concepts she has learned. I always gain so much from these discussions, but I feel slightly ashamed at the same time. In her 80s and now 90, and remains devoted to learning. In fact, I think I probably attend fewer workshops in a year than she does. Is my excuse of being too busy with work a genuinely valid excuse? And I think Anne's curiosity for the new and the sheer vitality of her thinking never cease to amaze me. I think I'm going to share a story of how Anne has given me the courage and guidance to feel less uneasy, or perhaps even a bit confident about being not very psychoanalytic. It's about her influence on my clinical model for school refusal. School refusal has become an increasingly severe issue for adolescents as well as children, and in many countries, especially in Taiwan. And working with them is highly challenging, especially with these who are significantly withdrawn and deeply stuck in a withdrawn state. However, to my knowledge, this has not yet been established as a specialist field in psychoanalytic psychotherapy in the same way as trauma, autism, or eating disorder have, with their rich conceptualizations and clinical frameworks. There are some common experiences of patients, parents, and therapists alike. For instance, adolescents often feel lost, and school refusing adolescents often feel lost and adrift. Although there's an absence of pressure on them, they can experience no sense of ease, as they often live with shame and regret. Parents frequently split between unconditional gratification and excessive harshness. while therapists face uncertainty about whether to explore patients' experience or active curriculum. While concepts like Betty Joseph's psychic equilibrium and psychic change and John Steiner's psychic retreat are incredibly helpful in understanding these patients. But what happens after they emerge from psychic retreat? What do we do when they actually want to change? Conceptualize these issues in two stages. The first is patient's emergence from psychic retreat, and the second is a post-emergence journey to restore their adaptive functioning. So I found that more than just exploratory work is required for many children with withdrawn school refusal. This promotes a reflection on the therapist's stance. While therapists remain an analytical space, they also adopt an active, supportive approach in a high-risk scenario, such as devising a safety plan or liaising with psychiatrists and parents in order to help the patient to manage the crisis. But the school refusal constitutes a crisis. I view it as a to say crisis. Refusal to attend school threatens patients' failure, threatens patients' future possibilities in life. Is that not also dangerous? In the absence of directly accessible educational resources for collaboration, it is not necessary for the therapist to is it not necessary for the therapist to adopt a more active and supportive stance? But for me, as a therapist who identifies myself as a Kleinian therapist, I felt deeply disheartened and anxious when my mixed, exploratory, and supportive model for school refusers was criticized for not being psychoanalytic enough. As a result, I present my understanding of these withdrawn children and my work model to Anne, seeking her guidance. I cannot tell much detail about the presentation due to time constraints. I will simply give an example of how Anne helped me during this discussion. I suggested that these adolescents, having left school, not engaged in any training or work, they lack any structure in their lives. Like floating in outer space, they are devoid of pressure, but they are also entirely adrift, with one of the consequences being profoundly enfeeblement or weakness, just as astronauts experience muscle atrophy upon return to Earth. These adolescents experience a kind of mental disuse atrophy. Tasks they could once do easily have become very difficult after prolonged withdrawal. And inspired me by expanding this concept, describing how learning at school and the maintenance of a socially connected life provided an experience of gravity. So therefore, this state could be reframed through the lens of a lack of gravity. So thank you very much, and that is a brilliant idea. While discussing with Anne the dilemma of patients who present a state of mind desiring change, but who feel utterly lost and helpless, I propose a four-stage rehabilitation concept. On hearing this terminology, I think you can probably understand why I was criticized for not being psychoanalytic enough. However, Anne supported my approach during supervision, suggesting that individuals who are completely lost and needed someone to draw them a map. So I'm profoundly grateful for Anne's support in refining this working model, and I subsequently named my four-stage approach as map drawing, based on her comment. And I would like to touch upon the broader inspiration and lessons I've drawn from Anne, facilitated by her remarkable openness. While remaining anchored in her core theoretical tradition, she also embraces new, potentially useful concepts and practices. She is also sufficiently flexible to propose different ways of thinking and working, which has not only influenced my work with school refusing patients, but also with perverse and psychotic ones. I hope Anne will not mind if I retell a brief story that she shared with me recently. When she first proposed the concept of the ungrown child many, many years ago, her friend Betty Joseph, a very influential analyst, disagreed with this idea, which saddened Anne. However, as we know that this disagreement did not deter her from further developing the concept and its associated techniques, ultimately leading to what is now widely recognized as the three levels of interpretation. This openness and the courage in innovative thinking and have profoundly inspired me, whether as a therapist, a supervisor, or simply a person. I would like to leave you by sharing one final story that exhibits an embrace of positive transference, not only in the consulting room. For me, as a self-funded international student, having left home to study at Tavistock, I unfortunately encountered the pandemic during my final year of training. As a result, I was unable to properly say goodbye and express my gratitude to my tutors before leaving the UK. Years later, I returned to London and met many of my former tutors, including Anne, to say a belated goodbye. And what is impressive is that when I expressed my gratitude to each tutor for the profound impact they have had on me, Anne's reaction left me with the deepest impression. Usually, when we hear such appreciation, we might modestly downplay our influence or attribute it to the other person's hard work, which I would say is quite valid. However, as I detailed my immense gratitude for the help Anne had given me, she displayed a genuine curiosity and interest. She listened intently and then responded with great joy, saying how happy she was to hear me say these things to her. As psychoanalytic therapists, we naturally need to stay aware of idealization. But sometimes I wonder that if we Kleinians have become so hypersensitive to idealization that it feels like allergy. We are allergic to idealization. Recognizing idealization is important, of course, but Anne's thinking on this is so refined. She argues that for those who lacks a solid internal good object, idealizing a good object can actually be helpful rather than problematic. This made me think that when encountering a lively, inspiring, and a thinking heart, I mean a good object, the intense positive feelings that encounter arouses may not only be an idealization, but rather the realization of the preconception of a good object. The profound attitude of gratitude that accompanies this realization is worth being fully experienced and gladly received as a reciprocal gift. Such an attitude is deeply meaningful for the person who encounters that good object, whether it is someone with a severe history of deprivation or someone without. This is not just an insight derived from Anne's vision, but also something I've felt deeply in my personal interactions with her. So I wish to express my profound gratitude to Anne. She has given me the courage to explore and develop therapeutic approaches I find effective, even when they depart from the traditional psychoanalytic model, and has also provided the vital guidance needed when mapping the uncharted territory, ensuring I do not lose my bearings and allowing me to commit the path I'm still exploring. Thank you so much and happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Sing. Now we have Howard. Where are you, Howard Levine? Let me see, where are you?
I've unmuted myself.
Here you are. Here you are. Wait, here you are. Okay.
I'm going to make some prepared remarks, but I thought I'd start this way with as I listen to so many of the wonderful and beautiful tributes, personal tributes, intellectual tributes, and so on. I'm reminded of how lonely our work can be and how hard it can be to follow one's own experience beyond the boundaries of received wisdom and accepted ideas about practice. And I think for each of the colleagues who've spoken today, there's been a sense that I've felt of Anne's you're being live company in our voyage of discovery and innovation based on our own experience and how important that is because um, of how difficult it is. And as I listen to our descriptions of what you've taught people, I, I'm reminded of something my mother used to say. My mother was not a well-educated woman. She graduated from high school with a commercial diploma so she could type and do stenography and became a secretary before she had her kids. But my mother used to say, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And I think that that is an underlying foundational assumption behind Anne's work. So with that, let me go into the prepared remarks. It's not difficult to celebrate and pay tribute to Anne for all that she's taught us and given to us over the years, and for the warmth, friendship, and love that she's shared. What's difficult is restricting our praise to a far too brief 10 or 15-minute intervention. Of course, the time limit itself is a tribute to Anne because it reflects the fact that there are so many of us who want to express our thanks, our appreciation, our love. What I will focus upon, and I think others have done this as well today, is the connection between the essence of who I feel Anne is as a person, what it's like to be in a relationship with her, and the ways in which she's expanded upon and transcended the limitations of her initial training to formulate a language and theory of an essential human dimension, one that can be summed up in the implications of the title of her remarkable book, Live Company. Anyone who has contact or spent any time with Anne knows and has felt, whatever else she may be, she is curious, open-minded, non-dogmatic, warm, and lovingly alive. Her aliveness is a quality from which so many of us have benefited, not the least of whom are the autistic, neuroatypical, developmentally withdrawn and undrawn patients that she has helped and taught us to help in a more effective way of understanding and treating them. Anne's contributions continue. They continue to reflect her remarkable openness to new ideas, her commitment to the expansion of psychoanalytic thinking and treatment beyond the boundaries of classically received wisdom, which, by the way, remains essential. And this openness has proven enormously valuable when working with the wide range of patients and psychic organizations at the limits of classical analyzability. In her marvelous second book, The Thinking Heart, Anne begins by reminding readers that live company was not only relevant to the understanding and treatment of autism, but applied to many different situations in which patients have limited ego capacity and are too overwhelmed by despair or persecution to benefit from interpretations that seek to remove defenses against painful truths. When faced with these patients, analysts and therapists need to respond to or even carry for them their hopes and their aspirations, and that such interventions need not encourage manic denial when thoughtfully applied. Cast in the level of her in the language of her levels of interpretation paper, Anne's understanding of what's required goes beyond the work of explication and naming, beyond the why and the what of things, to the level of reclamation and the hey interpretation, which insists that there is an object present, that relationship, cooperation, codependence, and meaning might actually exist in the world and be of value. She tells us, long before certain patients process their hatred and find their capacity for love, they have to develop the capacity to be interested in an object with some substantiality, with some life, or in the case of perversion, strength and a capacity to excite in a non-perverse fashion. She's speaking here of those patients who often dwell in states of dissociation, despairing apathy, deviant excitement, patients for whom the question arises of whether feelings or meanings matter at all. For these patients, objects may be experienced as uninteresting, unvalued rather than devalued, useless, possibly mindless. The therapeutic remediation and interventions that these patients may require lies at the foundations of mental and relational life. These are patients beset by affectless states of autism, dissociation, apathy following chronic despair and neglect. They may be unable to listen, to feel. They may exhibit a chronic apathy about relating which goes beyond despair. Nothing is expected. They may be best described as undrawn rather than withdrawn. In their treatment, as we've heard, they first need to be helped to be able to feel and to find meaning. Then feelings can begin to be identified and explored. Eventually, explanations which bring in additional alternative meanings may be heard and taken in. These are conclusions drawn from her clinical and personal experience. Anne asserts that with some patients, it may be more useful at times to think less about the contents of unconscious fantasy. And this must have alarmed her Kleinian colleagues a great deal. It may be more useful at times to think less about the contents of unconscious fantasy and more about the incapacity to engage in the activity of unconscious fantasizing. She therefore offers us a perspective that allows us to begin to consider the impact of distortions and failures of environmental provision on the capacities to think and to dream in the earliest periods of development. These distortions and failures can produce a psychic desert in infancy that may gather defensive or addictive motives during a development to adulthood. These motives would certainly need analytic attention, she says. However, so also with the accompanying or underlying deficit, where the object, rather than being avoided, is hardly found due to its remoteness or weakness. In such cases, more may be at stake than the vicissitudes of unconsciously motivated fantasies of love, hatred, and destruction. In some non-neurotic patients, she tells us, the so-called defenses are better seen as desperate attempts to overcome and recover from states of despair and terror. They carry, that is, elements of basic developmental needs for protection, for preservation, a sense of urgency and potency, and even revenge and justice. So for some patients, while it may not be enough to give them good experiences, it may be necessary to point out to them that good experiences are what they like, need, and wish for. As Anne has discovered and told us, even autistic children look for something without knowing what they're looking for, but recognize it when they get it. So in addition to the more traditional classical interpretations, the analyst of these non-neurotic patients may have to go in and get the patient, awaken them to life, awaken them to their own aliveness. Or, as Anne put it in a book review of a book that David Power and I edited called Engaging Primitive Anxieties of the Emerging Self, she said, "We must provide company for the patient in the dance of development." In a live company, she expanded upon this. She said, "Attention, before it can be held, sometimes has to be caught and elicited. For alpha function to operate," she said, "the object has to be seen to be worth attending to in the first place. Consequently, we have to find ways of helping these children to attend to us, have to sustain their attention. Emotionally heightened interest is central to this process." So the analyst, she says, has to provide something vitalizing and intensified to attract the patient's attention to the analyst as a live object, to upregulate affect in the situation, to insist on meaning and calling the child into contact with an object, also recalling the child to him or herself when there is a severe deficit in both the child's self and internal objects. And of course, this applies to working with severely withdrawn, despairing adult patients as well. So Anne's work alerts us to the need to distinguish states of despair from those of depression, melancholia, or persecution. And she tells us giving up is different from dissociating or splitting. Similarly, she distinguishes the lack of integrating processes from attacks on linking or attacks on the capacity to know, and insists that some protective mechanisms can become unproductive but habitual and should be distinguished from defensive activity that's motivated and in some often unconscious sense intentional. For those of you who are familiar with the development and reasoning of my writings about the unstructured unconscious, non-ideational representation, unrepresented states, you may see in Anne's thinking a convergence and support of my own. It was therefore with great pleasure, surprise, and gratitude that when she reviewed the book that David Power and I edited, Anne concluded that what we offered, and this is at the heart of Anne's work, what we offered was a challenge to the fundamental credo of psychoanalysis that psychological states are always full of meaning. I will gladly cede pride of place to Anne for implying, if not directly offering, the same challenge throughout her work. We might at this point say with Hamlet that there is far more neath heaven and earth than is written of in our books, although thanks to Anne's contributions, this is a little less true than it was before she started writing. So thank you, Anne. We love you. I love you. And happy birthday.
Thank you very, very much, darling people. How wonderfully generous.
Thank you so much, Howard. Well, I will read that Robin Holloway wrote, "Thanks to Howard for his wonderful slip in saying the sinking heart. We should add the sunken heart." Okay. Thank you so much, Howard. Well, the second, let me see here. Here. The second gift we want to share before giving you the word, please raise your hand, because now is the turn for all of you who want to say some words and share comments. And of course, we're going to listen to our dear Anne as well, but please raise your hand. And I just want to share that Tim Smith, who is here, I think a child psychotherapist from the UK, and I are working on many projects, including an online series of children and adolescents to share Beyond's legacy. And today, the Santa Maria Association officially opened a new scholarship named the Children and Adolescent Anne Alvarez Scholarship, open to all interested in attending any of our events. So please contact us or share this with your colleagues, and we'll be glad to welcome them as well. And now we have Jennifer Davids that raised her hand. Let me see, Jennifer, where are you?
There she is.
Oh. If you can raise your hand so I can see you. I don't see you. Wait.
Way up there
Oh,
at
yeah,
the
yeah.
top of mine.
I think I see you. Yeah. So you can, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much, Janie, for organizing this, and happy birthday, Anne. And may you live another however many years you want to live. I just want to say that I met Anne when she came to the Anna Freud Center. I'm a child and an adult psychoanalyst. And you were really welcomed there, Anne, I think, by Anne-Marie Sandler, who really wanted you to come to actually enliven the Anna Freud Center, because our director, George Moran, had died, a young American director, and we were all quite depressed. And Anne certainly, when she came, and we always wanted more of her, she certainly enlivened us. I also want to thank you, Anne, because I've only recently allowed myself to be supervised by you. And I come from a very different tradition, a Freudian independent tradition, and a very Winnicottian tradition, is your open-mindedness that a lot of people have commented on. And I also think that you have a wonderful way of interrogating tradition and innovation. It isn't only integrating, but you actually interrogate it. And I feel very comfortable in my supervisions with you when I can interrogate. So thank you very much.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now we have Lisa.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah.
There you are.
Yes.
Oh, hello,
There
Lisa.
you are, Anne. Okay. I didn't have remarks prepared, but I could not be here without saying something to you, Anne. I feel emotional, as others have spoken of feeling, because you had so much to do with my development as an analyst, with my coming into being and having an identity as an analyst. So just so other people understand, I came to psychology very late from a prior career. I then, after my doctorate, kind of stumbled into the NYU postdoctoral program of psychoanalysis with no idea really of what or who I was to be as a psychoanalyst. And in my fumbling around to describe the characteristics of an adult patient to a senior faculty member, he said, "Oh, chapter 5, of course, of Live Company." And I raced off to get the book, which I completely devoured, as well as every one of your other articles. Finally, I worked up the courage to call you and ask you to consult me by phone, which was thrilling. And I think Paul Bell, I believe, made lovely remarks earlier about your influence on him. And he demonstrated, he produced the evidence of the first copy of Live Company. But look at mine with all these tabs on it. This is how it became biblical in my own evolution as an analyst. And after I wrote my first article about an adult drawing on some of your work, I felt very pleased with myself. I thought I was introducing Alvarez to the American psychoanalytic non-Kleinian audience who work with adults, not just children. I thought I was doing that, helping others discover you. And then lo and behold, within a few years, many other people were writing about discovering you for their clinical populations, their parts of the country, their theoretical cohort. So what I've come to think is just discovery is part of your idiom. And, you delight in the slightest movement and ruffle in the most withdrawn, unresponsive individual. You delight in ideas, you delight in people, and you somehow in the process manage to infuse the enzyme of discovery in the recipient, so the recipient becomes a discoverer as well, or believes herself to be, which is the effect you had on me. And so it's been a privilege to know you and to feel your contribution to my evolution as an analyst. Thank you so much.
Well, that's wonderfully kind of you. Wonderfully kind.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
And Lisa never let me get away with anything too cheaply or easily. If I thought I'd explain, she'd say, "What do you really mean by an internal object?" And then I would say, da 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 da. And then another year or two had passed, and she'd say, "Well, come on now, what do you really mean by it?" It went on for years. No, and then she was editing a whole issue of psychoanalytic dialogue. So then I had to put it all down on paper, just for her. So it's going on, as it were. I'm sure we're not done yet.
Thank you. Now we have Jean. Jean, here you are.
Again.
Here.
Yeah. Yes. Well, happy birthday, Anne. I just think we can't just say Anne without saying Al, because Anne and Al have been with me throughout my career as a couple entertaining the love of music and poetry, and have introduced me to some, with Al reading his poetry, and them together talking about trying to find one's authentic voice. And Anne, I dedicated my book, The Silent Child, to Anne. I was working with 19 children who were not walking, talking, or eating. And I think what we're all saying is, Anne was there supporting us in the deepest emotional way that allowed us to hold on to something. And I put a quote in the book dedicated to Anne saying, something from Camus, saying, "The aim of art is to understand first. And if we listen attentively, we shall hear a faint flutter of wings and the gentle stirring of life and hope." And I want to thank you, Anne, because you accompanied me through the morning in different parts of my life and the morning in the children. And I'm so very grateful to you.
You dear Jean.
Thank you so much, Jean. Felicity.
Hi, Anne. Hello, everybody. It is an absolute pleasure to be here celebrating your birthday and you. And well, Anne supervised my intensive case when I was training at the Tavistock. And then she always welcomed all of us trainees with a cup of coffee into her consulting room. And I just wanted to speak about what it was like to be supervised by you, because you met me with such warmth and directness, and I have been surrounded by straight talkers all of my life. And I think the directness and the straightness that you get to the point of things is really quite remarkable and so, so helpful. And, I have learned a huge amount from you, and I enjoyed very much being supervised by you. And then, we then had our group supervision, our peer group supervision that continues with you. And then when you so generously supported me to work at Respond, where your all of your contributions and thinking continues in the supervision groups that we run there. So I just want to say thank you so much. There's so many things, anecdotes I think I could tell of, of supervisions where you left me feeling so confident and, helped me to really feel that the thing that would help me in this work with children that can be so challenging is that there is a well of playfulness and creativity in all of us that we need to tap into and that we need to stay alive. And when you said things when things were so, was this beautiful tone of voice that you take when you'd say, I'm so sorry that this is so difficult, and it just always really helped. So I just want to say thank you very much. And one of the things that helped me most when I was bringing my intensive case to an end is that you said to me, this little boy who was constantly in a rush, very traumatized little boy, and you said you need to help him understand that right until the last minute, the last second of the session, of the last day, you're with him, and that you're going to keep working until the very last second of the sessions. And that has stayed with me forever. So when, Paul talks about you being there with every fiber of your being, that completely transcends in your supervision and the gifts that you've given to us. So yes, you're very loved, Anne, and respected. And yeah, I wish you all the very, very best.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, dear woman. Lovely to see you.
And you.
And to hear all that, yes.
Thank you so much, Felicity. Robin?
Yeah. I think Lisa Director and I probably share the same copy of Live Company, which, as you can see, has been much loved and much mangled. I just want to echo Kai and say how inspiring your work is. I think the etymology is Latin, inspirare, or something like that, to breathe in. And breathing in is necessary to life. It's life-giving. Thank you for enlivening us all.
Dear Robin, how lovely to see you. Well, thank you so very much for that. Just before we go on, dear Jani, I just wondered, do you want me, can I say one or two things about the other speakers before
Absolutely, yes, that's what I was going to ask now. Only
Well,
I want to read.
No, I'm happy to do it later. There are just one or two things I want to say. They don't have to be now.
No, it's perfect now because I was going to invite the guests after you say something. Yeah, I just want to mention that in continuing with the chat and the sleeps, Christos Sideras wrote, I heard the Sacred Heart.
Oh, sweet. How lovely.
Go on, the stage is yours, dear Anna.
Yes, I don't know if I've got myself together enough, but one of the things that I just wanted to underline, but two things I wanted to underline, and then the third sort of theoretical point was just I was grateful that Gali mentioned the issue of chronicity that I underline with these children, because I do think it is an issue that gets missed in people who work with children, because we think of chronic conditions. Certainly when I was a young psychologist, we very much distinguished between acute schizophrenia and chronic schizophrenia. And the people with the chronic condition, tended to be at least in their 30s or 40s or, heading for a lifetime incarcerated in residential hospitals. And it was very tragic and very, they didn't have, I was working on a rehabilitation program. They didn't have trousers that stayed up, but it turned out they didn't have belts either. And they didn't know what year it was or what month it was, but it turned out there were no calendars and no watches and no clocks anywhere on the ward. I mean, they were limited. They looked, if you saw them in their clothes dragging around with the trousers falling down, they looked like people in the camps. And it wasn't that many years after the Nazi camps were closed. I mean, it was really absolutely dreadful that they were so unprotected from reality. Anyway, I just wanted to emphasize the importance of chronicity, even in childhood. And I was glad that somebody, I think she's written this somewhere before, but anyway, I'm grateful to her for underlining it because I think it gets a little bit neglected. And the other thing I was going to take up, that several of the people at the start of this discussion mentioned that I'd been sort of brave and courageous. And the truth is, actually, I realized I was. I found it so painful that I couldn't persuade people like Betty, who was my dear family friend, and Irma, another dear family friend, as well as professional colleagues, that I couldn't persuade them of my ideas. And that they felt I was just being unanalytic and rather, I guess, too lighthearted or frivolous with the depth of the responsibility we had as a receiver of projections. And it gave me great pain. In some ways, the child psychotherapists more gradually possibly took the ideas on because they were often working with children similar to the children I was seeing. So maybe with them it came a bit earlier, but it gave me pain because both Betty and Irma, and later Priscilla, who also didn't like the idea of what's the word I want? Unvalued objects. They just didn't believe that these were unvalued. They thought they were, resisted. And so I found that very painful that those three people couldn't accept that some of these children were really different and there was a thing called a void. And the void, but we might have to find ways of filling the void. Anyway, there was one other thing I was going to say, which is that a couple of months ago, I was giving a talk in Denver, maybe only a month ago, Denver, Colorado, to the Psychoanalytic Society there. And I ended whatever I can't remember what the talk was about, but at the end of it, I just gave this plea to the group, to the audience. I just wish somebody would help me understand the difference between an interesting object and a good object, because I was talking about the difficulties that it's not always that it's a bad object that the patient is turning away from. They may not be awakened by you as an interesting creature. They just may not think grown-up human things called humans are interesting. And so they don't listen to you and they don't learn at school. And they get all sorts of funny diagnoses about learning disability. But their lack of interest is absolutely fundamental. It's not that they're experiencing you as persecutory. Anyway, I said that. And in the audience was a dear friend of mine whom I hadn't seen for some years because I haven't been up to London as much frequently now that I live in Cornwall, and called Mary Sue Moore, who's a very wonderfully clever woman. And she lives in Boulder, but she teaches a lot all over the country and doesn't publish enough, but writes now and then when she's writing with a colleague. Anyway, I said this thing, if somebody would only tell me what makes the difference between an interesting object and a good object. And she reminded me that my husband and I had always been very interested in her husband and her approach to her husband's work, because he was is still a mathematical physicist. a big expert in nonlinear dynamic theory. And she said the interesting object is functioning from a nonlinear dynamic point of view. It's not linear. It's not simply good. And I just thought, wow. So I offer you that as a real treat to think about and wonder about. Okay.
This is a fantastic invitation for all. And we can invite Joshua and Paul and to have another second round or to continue with what Anne is sharing. Let me see, where are you? And Howard and all of them. And I have Ira. You want to, Ira, you want to say, share something? Wait, before giving the word to the guests. Wait. Sorry, Shuki, I will add you again. And after Dr. Lowenstein, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, it's Era, and such a pleasure. Such a pleasure to celebrate your birthday and with so many colleagues and so many people. I think I met you about 25 or 30 years ago when you came to the San Francisco Psychoanalytic Institute. And then I've been hearing about your talks and reading your books. And later on, I was in supervision with you and now in a consultation group for a while. But maybe I want to share something a little bit idiosyncratic because we all heard about how creative, inspiring, generous, brilliant, courageous you are. But I had this very idiosyncratic reaction to you as a candidate because you were not only all of that, you were also so beautiful and fashionable. And I remember looking at your beautiful scarves and thinking, wow, what a role model, a woman that is so smart and so vivacious and all.
Oops.
Cherish.
Oh, thank you. Lovely. I like that idea.
Sorry, we lost the last seconds. Ira, can you repeat what you, I don't know if everyone lost it, but I didn't listen to it.
I was just saying that how much I enjoyed as a candidate seeing somebody who's not only a woman that is not only brilliant and courageous and interesting, but also so beautiful and fashionable. So,
absolutely. You can see the photos of the video are amazing. Yeah, I agree at all. Okay. Now we have the chance to listen again. Here you are, Howard. And Paul.
Yeah, I'd like to share two thoughts.
Yes, go on.
That kind of came up as I was listening to all the wonderful contributions and of course to Anne. One was a kind of a feeling that I was flooded with when I saw the photographs of Anne with Irma and Betty, you know, our dear friends and mentors. And I was thinking, that what came up quite a bit was the courage to question or expand a theoretical background. And of course, I think any child analyst who was working very intensively with autistic kids had in a way to fight a lot of prejudice and misunderstandings and in a way excommunication sometimes. But I also would like to point out that we all grew up within a very solid foundation of Kleinian and Bjornian thinking. And I think that kind of foundation proved to be very, very fertile, for thinkers like Anne to grow within. So I'd just like to point out that we also are in debt, to our ancestors, so to speak, and the And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that something that really stood out for me, not just by reading Anne or learning from her, but also by a personal acquaintance with her and Al, that psychotherapy and certainly psychoanalysis is a form of art, much more than it is a science. And I think that having an artist's heart and mind and sensitivity goes a long, long way. And I think that Anne's thinking and writing manifests that beautifully. Even the titles for your two books, Life Company and The Thinking Heart, have a very kind of direct a reference to works of art and literature. So thanks for being an artist. That's what I wanted to say.
Well, thank you also for reminding me of my love of Klein and Bion, because that's very helpful. But I also love the idea that you said that the idea of the three different levels is a kind of moral framework. I thought that was really rather profound and true. It's not just, tinkering. It's not just, you have to put your bottom finger on the top scale and that's how you learn to type, kind of thing. It wasn't learning to type. It's something much deeper that we all have to learn. So that was very, very helpful to me. Thank you very much for that idea, dear folks.
Sorry, Paul.
Thank you. And I just had a thought listening to everybody talk and listening to so many of your supervisees. I was thinking a bit about numbers, and just to share another anecdote. You may remember, and you actually referred me my first ever patient in private practice, who was the grandson of somebody quite eminent in our field. And I had a review with this patient's mum at the end of the work. And the work had gone very well, and Anne had guided me through it very helpfully, and yeah, I think I was useful to this young man. And at the end of the review, Mum said, "I'm really glad that Anne put us in touch." And I said, a bit kind of flippantly, "Well, Anne's helped a lot of children." And she raised an eyebrow at me, and she said, "Well, I think that's a bit of an understatement, don't you?" And I agreed, and I think when we hear so many of your supervisees talking about how you've guided them. There are thousands and thousands of children across the world who have been nudged one way or the other on the developmental trajectory thanks to your work and thinking, which I think is a really lovely thought.
Okay, thank you.
That's true. Here I see Chiara and Galit also. Well, Howard is here. You want to add something, Howard? Here you are, and here you are. And I saw Paul, the other Paul. Let me find him. Go on.
I'll add this story because we share, Anne and I, you'll hear Anne and I share a certain form of battle scar. Anne was talking about how she couldn't convince Betty. When I first got to know Betty and we became friends, I had the great opportunity and fortune to follow her around through the entire Amsterdam IPA Congress and sit next to her and talk with her. And this was, like just a kid in a candy shop. I mean, it was marvelous.
Yeah.
But the one thing that Betty would not agree to in what we talked about was the idea that because the analyst had an unconscious, that projective identifications always went in both directions. No. If you're well analyzed, it's not a problem. It's not
Really?
there. And she wouldn't accept the idea that the nature of the unconscious applies to both participants, no matter how well you're analyzing. And so, and I think the difference may have been that I think if I understand your background, you were trained at the Tavistock. The Tavistock was a kind of melting ground, a meeting ground for all three of the orientations in the London psychoanalytic. It was heavily influenced by the Kleinians, but it had a Winnicottian influence. It had a Bowlby's influence, it had a
Yes.
Freudian influence.
Yes,
And
that's
and
true.
and the Tavistock didn't have to go through the controversial discussions where each side had to circle the wagons and protect their own territory theoretically and so on and so
Yes.
forth. And I think that you had the luxury of being free of that. And
I
so
think that's very I think that's a really interesting point, which I never thought about. But it's true. We were taught by Bowlby, we were taught by Winnicott, we were taught by Michael Fordham of the Jungians. We
Yeah.
had quite a. I mean, they never hung around for very long, but nevertheless, they were. We had a taste of them. It's a very interesting point. However, I just would like to add, I'd also had a bad Kleinian analysis, and then a very good one. And the first one was going crazy, and I had to leave. But the second one was Leslie Sonn, who worked a lot with psychotic patients and was very influenced by Bion, and was what I would regard as a kind Kleinian, if you see what I mean, and full of life. So I also had a different experience from some people. He wasn't strict and severe like some of the Kleinians still were at that point.
Yeah.
He was he was fun.
I'll just add the concept of a kind Kleinian felt like such permission for me. And when we because I felt like I had to, prior to meeting you, had to go down this little alleyway that didn't always seem very kind to me. And so the notion of a kind Kleinian is something I think about a lot.
Good. Oh, they're out there.
I remember the first time I met you in Cannes, I think, in one of the Tustin Trust. I asked you, what is your, to whom you belong and how do you define yourself? And you told me you are a neo-Kleinian.
Did I?
Yes. And another thing, talking about Kleinian, I remember that you told also Shuki and me in the interview we did with you that you actually encountered Klein almost by chance, that it was a friend that offered you to read, to offer
Yes,
articles,
I was working.
and they blew your mind.
I came over here from Canada to here to work for a year or two with a very distinguished psychologist who was doing work, believe it or not, on the different psychologist, not an analyst at all, on the difference between the personalities of psychotic, depressive melancholics versus paranoid schizophrenics. And he was very outraged because a rather dreadful behavioristic, what's his name, psychiatrist at the Maudsley Hospital was trying to show that their personalities followed from their symptoms, and my boss, who was doing research trying to show that personalities were separate from symptoms, and you didn't have to be paranoid, have a paranoid personality just because you had a paranoid schizophrenic illness. And he had asked me to look through the literature. And in those days, we didn't have, Google. We had to go to libraries. And I used to go to the University College Library and look all through every single psychiatric book that had ever been published. There was nothing about the personalities of these people. There was only stuff about their symptoms. So I was complaining about this to a psychologist called Jeffrey Alcott, who rode on the same train and worked at the hospital down the line. And I'd met him a couple of times at joint conferences between the two hospitals. And I was complaining, and he said, "Oh, you want to know about personalities of paranoids versus depressives? You ought to read some Melanie Klein." And he put me onto a couple of papers. They were, thank God, latish papers, the morning paper and the manic depressive paper. And they were just wonderful, changed my life.
I want to read, before I think Paul Moore wanted to say something, but Rachel Bierman wrote, "I'm sorry that I have to leave early, but wanted to respond to Anne's question about the difference between a good and interesting object. that the latter involves an unpredictability, a creative and imaginative quality, where humor and mischief, perhaps a little closer to the Jungian concept of the gold within the shadow self, rather than the more wholesome quality of the good enough mother, that especially working with people of any age who exist on the edges of society, of psychic existence versus annihilation and nothing less, we need an energy which instills curiosity, which is colorful, dares to be different from the norm. Thank you, Anne, for a wonderful and inspiring afternoon. And also, Christus wrote about the influence that you were talking about. He said, an Jungian influence directly and via beyond. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. This is a quote from Jung.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank her.
Of course. Paul, you wanted to say Paul Moore?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to what Anne said, and then what Rachel actually said, about the interesting object being unpredictable. And Anne and myself had a conversation about that recently, and it reminded me of some of the work of Carl Friston and predictive energy,
Yes.
free energy.
Yes.
And I said to Anne, maybe you should email him. And the next time I spoke to Anne, she said to me, "Oh, I've just been emailing Carl Friston, and we're having a conversation about free energy." So
He replied. He replied.
exactly. And just that's kind of, I think, testament to Anne's curious mind, and openness, still kind of researching and interrogating ideas. And I also just wanted to echo something that I think was Felicity said earlier about, it just reminded me of consulting with Anne, where she would say, if a case was very, very difficult, she would say, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And that really, it sounds like two simple words, but it meant an awful lot. It means an awful lot when it's said like that, that somebody actually recognizes that what you're actually working with is very, very difficult. So yeah, just to echo that.
It's a Canadian thing. We say I'm so sorry, and people think that we are feeling guilty. It doesn't mean that we feel guilty. It's just that we're really sad for you. But it's a Canadian expression, and I always get a little bit I confuse people when I say it.
Shuki, you were going to say something? I don't know if you were.
No, I was just laughing.
Oh, sorry. You can just open your micro if you want to say something else. Chiara, I think.
Well, I think that Anne has taught us how to learn from the patient, which is simple, but it's not always easy. And she has shown that we can help, but sometimes we can also harm patients with what we do, what we say. She has pointed out that we can persecute our patients with interpretations sometimes.
Yes.
And we must, if we are not synchronized at the right level, I think it's very, and the other thing is that it seems also simple, but staying alive in the session with the patient is not easy. And
Yes.
Keeping our investment on the patient in some difficult cases, in some difficult conditions. And so sometimes is sharing with the supervisor, with colleagues, that helps us to keep our investment, which is so important.
Yeah.
Being alive, staying alive. And Anne thought a lot about that. Thank you, Anne, again.
Barbara?
You've all said this. I want to thank Anne also. I just admire her so much, and she's been so important to me. And your capacity to Anne to breathe life into me and to have me breathe life into a patient, I'm so grateful for, and just so it's like magic. I don't know where you quite get it. And I came to Anne rather late in my life, and foolishly presented her a patient that I thought was pretty boring. How could I present this patient to Anne? And of course, Anne had such interest in the patient, and I keep presenting patients to her, and I think I'm sure she's seen many, many, many patients like this, but she continues to have this interest in them, this passion to get to know them. It's just, remarkable. I guess I also want to say that she's been a model for me as she goes into this later part of her life with energy and hope, and she's been putting this house together, and the other thing I want to say is I've been supervised a lot in my life, and as I said to Anne not so long ago, you've been the best supervisor I've ever had. And she said to me, well, I don't quite know how I do it. I don't know how she does it either, but it's some combination of she's able to make, I think, all of us feel that we're special to her. I mean, just like she does it with, like we all feel so special to her. Recently I sent her pictures of my granddaughter, whatever. Whoever did that with a supervisor, but it's really fine with her because she has this interest in people. So I really love you, Anne, and thank you.
Yes, and the trouble is, I have grandchildren too, but now they're huge, big, lumbering, gigantic 6-footers, not the little babies I used to cuddle. So I'm really glad to hear about other people having little babies. It cheers me up. Yes, absolutely. Very funny.
Thank you, Barbara.
Anyway, it's very, very kind. Whoops, I've done something awful. What have I done? Oh, there it is. I just suddenly lost all the photographs. Anyway, dear woman, dear Johnny.
Mum.
Where are
I want to say something, Mum.
Oh, here, wait. Give me a second. Of course, Kate, wait.
Oh, where is she?
Let me, here you are, of course.
All I want to say
here you
is,
are.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, you this community of my mum's is so moving because you all love her so much, and the warmth and stimulation and all the non-linear interest, whoever said that, it has really kept her, her vim has also come from her relentless conversations with all of you in the most, life affirming way. So it's very moving for me to see you all and see Mum honoured like this. So I want to thank you, Jenny, and all of you, because it's really wonderful. Yeah. So thanks for appreciating her everything. Yeah.
Well, and thank you all for these wonderful comments. I was pretty terrified, and I think I'm still probably terrified about what's happened, but still, it was really interesting. And, people said a lot of things that, as I said, I'm even able to admit that there were times when I had to be quite brave and stuff like that. So why not admit that and that kind of thing? Anyway. And to darling Kate for everything. My goodness, what would I do without them? They're living. I'm living just 4 doors away from them, which is so fortunate for me. Really, very handy. One way of putting it.
And we have to thank Kate for sharing her mom with us.
Absolutely. I am so grateful, Kate. The photos were beautiful. And thanks. Without you, this never happened. So thank you, as Howard says, for sharing your mom with us. And as we say, up to 120. So I will contact you for more photos later. Okay. We thank you all for this extraordinary morning, evening, early morning for you, Sink Kay.
Thank you so very much. I'm very grateful. I'm very honored. I still don't know why this happened to me and it happened for me, but I'm hugely grateful and I'm knocked out by it, really. Just extraordinary.
Thank you so much. Now I invite you to, we can now open our micros so we can clap all, whatever you want for Anne Alvarez, our beloved Anne. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you for what you've done for
Thank
me.
you so much, Anne. Thank you.
Well deserved to all. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Yanni.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yanni.
Happy birthday.
Love you, Anne.
Bye.
Thank you so very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.